There are two more patterns of argument, valid forms of arguments that are worth being aware of that we encounter a lot in philosophy. The first one is called a constructive dilemma. And what it says is either P or Q. If P, then some third thing R is true. If Q, then some third thing R is true. Therefore, R is true. The idea is one or the other is true, P or Q. P implies the third thing R. Q implies the third thing R. And you know one of those two, P or Q, is true, you can conclude R. Give yourself a couple examples. See if you can come up with a good example of that. Now let's take a look at one final form of argument. This is a little bit of a complicated one, and you might have run across this one in mathematics. In fact, you probably did. Okay, mathitis guys, turn the brain back on. We're just going to explain the inference. Don't get nervous. Okay, and reductio ad absurdum, it's a a Latin word that gets whose meaning is to reduce to absurdity. And here's the way this kind of argument or this pattern of argument works. It says, we're trying to really prove that P is not true, but it says, let's assume for the sake of argument that P is true, and then what you do is show that you can then get to the conclusion from P, Q, and you can get to not Q, but the idea is Q and not Q is absolutely impossible. Therefore, what got you to this impossible situation is your assumption P, so the assumption has to be false. In other words, not P has to be true. That is a form of argument that we come across occasionally. We will come across it during the course of this semester. Another way that it kind of works is that, if P implies Q, if P then Q, and if P then not Q, well then P is impossible. And if something implies a contradiction or two contradictory things, it of necessity is false. But those are two interesting inferences, valid patterns, valid forms of inferences that we will encounter.